we have moralized regulation, meaning that it has become this like destination of the enlightened moral parent instead of just understanding again that it's like part of the human process. And what that does is it fuels dysregulation through the experience of shame.
Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I am really excited to get in today's conversation. We have talked quite a bit about emotional regulation on this podcast because as parents, as moms, it's a truth that our own emotional regulation has an impact on our kids. And so learning how to emotionally regulate, which is a skill most of us were probably not taught very well growing up, it's super important. And so it comes up in conversation a lot. Today, we're going to be looking at that conversation, but from a slightly different angle. We're actually going to be talking about how the pressures to emotionally regulate can add a complexity to the situation sometimes, and how maybe focusing on finding joy, pursuing that joy, could be just a different way to navigate finding regulation. So joining me for this conversation is Mackenzie Kinmond. She is a parenthood transformation coach and therapist who helps overwhelmed parents of young kids break out of survival mode and find real joy in everyday life again. Mackenzie, I am so excited to have you here. We connected in the comments on Instagram about this topic, and I was like, you have to come on. We need to talk about this. So it's finally happening. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us what you do as an attachment-focused therapist and a parenthood transformation coach, and how your own personal experience of parenting impact your work.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So let me start with the attachment-focused therapist part.
Yeah.
So when I say attachment, I'm not talking about attachment parenting, which is kind of a very particular set of values and practices. I'm talking about using attachment theory in the lens that I see the work that I do. So meaning seeing our early but also ongoing relationships, because I think we have this idea that like we have these early attachment experiences and then they set us up for our whole lives, which is the more we do research on attachment theory, the more we're seeing that no, it's our early experiences, but also our ongoing experiences with relationships, but how those early and ongoing experiences shape how we see ourselves, how we see our relationships, and how we see the world. And so an attachment-focused family therapist, which is what I started out as, works with the family unit, any kind of behavioral challenge or mood issue with the kid. We're starting at looking at like the kind of attachment system or relationships in the family. So that was how I got my start working as a family therapist. And then about a decade in, I had my own kids. And I was like, what the heck is happening? Like, there is zero joy in this. I am totally overwhelmed. I was shocked. I remember people saying, like, what's surprised you most, since becoming a parent? And I remember in those early months thinking, what surprises me most, honestly, is how much I understand the desire to like hit or throw your child, which sounds really bad, but that was my honest answer. Like,
Yeah.
I really struggled, and that surprised me. And that kind of sent me on a journey of looking at like, what are we missing when we're talking about the importance of connection, the importance of showing up for our kids, the importance of fostering secure attachment. What's the piece that we're missing? Because why is it so hard for me? I have the theory and I have the tools, or I thought I had the tools. And so that kind of started my journey into working more directly with parents and supporting them to figure out, how do you want to show up in your life? And it's hard to show up for your kids until you have figured out how you are showing up for yourself and with yourself. And so it's almost like developing a secure attachment with yourself as a parent as foundational to then everything else that we do with our kids, fostering secure attachment with them, addressing behavior, setting boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I say that I work as a parent transformation coach. I mean, it's not just about the parenting strategies or a set of, tools or whatever, but it's really about like our own kind of internal journey.
Yeah, I really love the distinction there because there's so much value in the parenting strategies and the tools and the education around that. I think there really is a place where that's important and makes a positive difference, if presented in a way that's helpful. Yeah. But I also think that there's a lot to be said about like figuring out how to do it your way.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to do it in a way that is aligned with like your own values and even the skills maybe that you come to the table with.
Yeah. Yes. And also like the patterning that we come with. Like I love the mission of your podcast, right? Which is about like getting away from perfectionism, because so many of us enter parenting with some kind of perfectionist, kind of overachieving, type A, people-pleasing tendencies. And that often like worked really well. Like in our lives, like growing up, like it kind of worked for us.
Yeah.
So it's like figuring out who we are as parents, but then also figuring out like what is no longer working. Because often those kind of patterns, perfectionism, overachieving, people pleasing, like they kind of crumble after we have kids. And I see that a lot with like, that was my own experience too, that it was not only figuring out like who I wanted to be as a parent, but like who I could no longer be, like what wasn't working for me and how could I shift that? And then who do I want to be outside of that?
Yeah. I mean, yes to all of that. You did speak in there about when you became a mom, like it surprised you I'll say the like volatile emotions that came up.
Yeah.
And I relate so deeply to that. I remember seeing the term mom rage somewhere and being like, oh, that's a thing. Like, and how validating it was just to know like, okay, other moms experience like intense anger when becoming a mom, anger that like I had never felt before, this level of anger that I would feel.
Yes.
Just in existing, like the overstimulation and frustration with all of it. Like it's hard to even pinpoint what it was. But in that, we know that talks about emotional regulation can be important, right? Because when our emotional state is all out of whack, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
Emotional regulation is often framed kind of as this hallmark of, quote, good parenting in a way, though. And I'm wondering from your perspective what regulation really means.
Yes. Okay. I love this question because it's so interesting with the mom rage. I feel like it's all over social media, like mom rage, mom rage. In some ways it's normalizing, but then on the other hand, we're like, and you should be emotionally regulated all the time. So it's like very confusing because on one hand, we're saying mom rage exists. On the other hand, we're like, but you should also be able to move through it and no longer have it. But really, regulation is a dynamic process. So it's not like a destination that we arrive at and then we stay at if we're like skilled enough or good enough. It's a dynamic like body brain neurophysiological, like meaning that body brain process that your thinking and your feeling and your urge to act are all kind of in alignment with each other. So it doesn't mean actually being calm. You can be angry and regulated. You can be sad and regulated, or scared and regulated, or you can be any of those things and dysregulated. And so it's the state of being like, I am safe enough to think and feel at the same time, and that I will generally act in line with my values and my like medium to long-term goals. So when we get dysregulated, our thinking brain goes offline, which I'm sure you know because you've talked about a lot about this on the podcast. We go into like the hyperarousal, like the overregulation, where we're like, ruminating thoughts, heart racing, that kind of thing. Or we go into the shutdown, that kind of low arousal, shutdown, numbing, dissociation. But the goal is not to avoid dysregulation. Like that's just human. We go in and out. It's a dynamic process where we go in and out of states of regulation and dysregulation. And so I think the goal is not regulated as a permanent state. The goal is, can we notice when we're moving into dysregulation? Can we notice when we have moved into dysregulation? And can we figure out how to recover from that? And then over time, can we work on the things? Like, can we work on regulation in a very holistic way? It's not just breathing. It's also like setting boundaries, knowing who you are, stop multitasking, get enough sleep, right? It's like there's a lot of factors that go into over time how often we are in that kind of window where we can think and feel and act all kind of in alignment with each other.
There's so much in there that you said that is interesting to me. Like, I want to look at it. You said we don't necessarily just avoid becoming dysregulated because it is part of like just the natural process of being human. But what's also coming forward for me is like the way we talk about emotional regulation as being calm, as being kind of like not having the emotions. It's almost like avoidance of having the big feelings that sometimes are like warranted, or even if they're not, like they're just also the feeling that's coming up.
100%. Yeah. And this is the thing with the mom rage kind of dichotomy, right? Which is like, on one hand, we're saying mom rage, everybody has mom rage, but also like don't really have mom rage because you should know how to be regulated. There's this author that I love. I think her name is Lisa Marciano. And she talks about how rage is like this sacred maternal experience that we should embrace, not in a way that's like, I'm just going to rage out everywhere on everyone, but really that it speaks to like the profoundness of the experience of being a parent, and that there is actually so much depth and wisdom in the experience of rage, that if we spend all our time, as you said, like thinking like we should be calm, what we actually do is we turn away from the emotions that we should actually be turning towards, not in a way that we let them run the show all the time, but in a way that we embrace them with like curiosity and acceptance. And it's that turning towards and like opening up, I think, that helps with more like authentic regulation, I would say, which is actually more of this dynamic process than like, I work with so many parents where their idea of like regulation is actually like white knuckling it.
Yeah.
Which is actually like an avoidance of emotion. It's not really regulation. It's just like a tensing and like a powering through, which is going to just fuel your over time. It's just going to fuel dysregulation because there's so much pressure for you to, like, as you said, like avoid the feelings instead of just moving through them in a way that sometimes lacks grace, but is probably more honest.
Yeah. I mean, I just can like feel that the pressure of like, okay, I'm supposed to be calm right now. And so I'm going to just like white knuckle it. And it does like end up becoming this like pressure cooker where it doesn't, you're not processing any of that. You're not dealing with it or experiencing it. I'm wondering if there's any other impacts of this idea that moms are always supposed to be regulated in this sense of like what we're talking about is kind of a message about regulation.
Yeah. Yes. I think that we have moralized regulation, meaning that it has become this like destination of the enlightened moral parent instead of just understanding again that it's like part of the human process. And what that does is it fuels dysregulation through the experience of shame. So that parent who is white knuckling it because they're trying to stay calm and be understanding and talk like in the voice that we see on social media, right? Of like the kind of kneeled down, really calm, which like I do talk to my kids that way, but not all the time. Yeah. And so I think, there's like, we're just trying to get it right. We're kind of white knuckling it. We're trying to get it right. And then when we have to be regulated to have access to the identity of being a good parent, then when we inevitably get dysregulated, we often get flooded with shame. What's wrong with me? How come I can't figure this out? I'm failing my kids. I'm harming my kids. And that kind of inner critic shame voice comes in. And shame is like one of the most dysregulating experiences to have because it's such a painful, hard emotion. And so we'll do anything to kind of get out of it. And so often what I see happening is we try to white knuckle it. We're trying to get it right. We're trying to do it right. And then we inevitably slip up because we're human. And then the shame comes in. And the shame then fuels the anxiety or the pressure to then do it better. But we're doing it from this place of like pressure and feeling like we're failing. When we do stuff from a place of shame, it's usually doesn't it doesn't foster regulation, right? It fuels dysregulation. So then we get stuck in that cycle where we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. We inevitably get dysregulated. Then we feel like stuck in this shame spiral. So we put more pressure on ourselves to just like do it better, get it right, learn more skills, read more, that we get stuck in that loop. So I think that pressure to be like always regulated is actually, I do see it backfire with a lot of the parents that I work with, where it tends to just fuel shame and more dysregulation.
Yeah. It's funny how when you lay it out that way, like how clear it is. Like, of course, if we know that dysregulation is just a natural part and it's going to happen, and we can accept that.
Yeah.
Of course, if we're aiming to be regulated all the time and we're not, because we're humans and we're raising children like in this world, like it's just not, we're not going to be regulated all the time.
Correct.
How it's like, of course, then it's going to lead to shame if our idea and understanding of like who we should be if we're good is somebody who's always regulated. And of course, then we're going to feel immense pressure and we're going to continue failing to this standard we've set for ourselves. And when you lay it out that way, it's like, okay, yes, like we can't just act like we're going to be regulated all the time. We can't just pretend that that's a reality. And yet, like you've said, that is kind of the message we get, that like that is what we should be striving for, is that ability to always get right back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've talked about joy being really like just as important as regulation, and maybe even, and you could speak to this, maybe even a means to regulation.
Yes.
I'm not really sure. I'm excited to kind of hear your take on that.
Yeah.
Can you share how cultivating that joy in motherhood changes the way we are able to show up?
Yes. Okay. So when I'm talking about joy, I'm not saying it's like one more thing that we have to do. When I'm talking about cultivating joy, what I'm talking about is when we talk about dysregulation or survival mode, what we're talking about, right, is when our brain has and our body has gone into like fight, flight, freeze. Mm-hmm. When we're in that mode, we cannot access joy, because joy is not an emotion that is useful when we to our survival, right? When we're like, we can be angry, we can be scared. Those emotions are more helpful when we need like survival. So it's very hard to be in survival mode and access joy. And so if we are moving towards joy, we are supporting that movement like out of survival mode. And joy is so it is both like helping us to move out of survival mode, but also the cultivation of joy is one of those things that like expands that like window of tolerance, so that that amount of space that we have, that we are regulated. Because usually along with joy, when I'm saying joy, I'm not saying like you have to be happy all the time, but it's along with the cultivation of joy comes the cultivation of awe and wonderment, of compassion. And so I do think that it helps us to move out of regulation and to also stay more regulated, because when we are thinking about cultivating joy, then it is less about getting it right and more about like how we are feeling in our life, in our like moment to moment. So this morning, I know you said like you just dropped your kids off. I dropped my kids off a few hours ago, and it was not a good morning. I thought we were so ahead of time, and all of a sudden we were how does that happen? We were like so late, and I was like, what?
I've been there.
You know, and then my kid had her winter boots on, and like, anyways, you know that we negotiate the first thing. I'm still chill. Like by the fourth thing, I'm like, get out of the car, right? Like it's not a pretty sight. If you saw that, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's a therapist and parent coach. You'd be like, what is wrong with this woman? So then I get in the car, and I could have stewed. And this is what a lot of us do, right? We get dysregulated and then we stew in the fallout of our own dysregulation, where we go, that's when we either could go into like the shame spiral of, God, why can't I just stay calm? Like, what is wrong with me? Like, what's the big deal? She just had her boots, just let it. Or we can go into the, stewing about our kids. Like, what's wrong with them? Why can't they just get out the door? And you can get just stuck in the dysregulation. The idea of allowing yourself to move back to joy, for me in that moment, was like chilling out, for taking a beat, putting some music on, with my kids, kind of re-engaging with them, asking them what they wanted to listen to. We're chit-chatting about what we're seeing along the way. And we're getting back into a rhythm where we're interested in the world, we're reconnected together, we're okay. And so again, the cultivating joy isn't about shoving everything under the rug. All bad emotions are not welcome here. It's about welcoming everything, but giving ourselves permission for joy to be one of those things. What I realized when I had young kids is that I was waiting for this moment where I was like regulated enough to allow myself the permission to claim the identity of a good enough parent and then to feel good in my parenting journey. And what I realized was like, no, I can actually cultivate the feeling good in my parenting journey alongside where I'm at. And so I think the cultivation of joy along with that comes other important things like self-acceptance, compassion, recovery from dysregulation. So that's my long-winded spiel about joy.
No, I mean, oh my goodness. I feel like all these little like light bulbs going off in my brain right now. And there's a couple things I want to kind of just reflect on there. One is that a word that like I kept thinking is resilience, like emotional
Yes.
resilience. It's almost
Yes.
like being able to pull yourself from the place of shame, like where you could go to shame.
Yeah.
And saying, it's actually okay for me to experience joy and to be able to get to that place and kind of bounce between different complex emotions, how powerful that is. And it feels resilient to me. It feels like you're able to move between, like you don't just get stuck in, oh my God, I just screamed at my kid because we're running late to school. Like it doesn't matter, but like it feels like it does. And so we get to that place where we're so dysregulated and it's so easy to like get stuck then in the icky crap that comes with it.
Yeah, getting dysregulated about the dysregulation.
Yes, totally. I mean, like, which is so many of us can relate to that. I mean, I feel like probably every mom can relate to that. If you are somebody who, strives to be a quote good mom, it's like, it's really easy then to get stuck in that like dysregulation about the dysregulation. Totally. The other thing that came to mind, and this is something I've been talking about a lot, is how since getting a divorce, since separating from my kid's dad, I've been just on a growth journey, as you would expect, right? Because lots has changed.
Yeah.
And something like a really big piece of that has been my baseline, like my baseline neutral, just as I exist in the world, is, I'll say, more positive, more joyous than it's ever been. It's not like I'm sitting there at neutral, like stoked on life and happy all the time at all. But it's just like the baseline is not, down. Yeah. Which I feel like for all of my adult life, and honestly, even thinking back to being a teenager, like it was, my baseline was just not actually a neutral. It was lower. Yeah. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people. But when you're talking about kind of getting out of survival mode and having joy be something that like you really can only access when you're out of survival mode, there's a lot going on in my head of like, if we're talking about getting to a neutral place at all, if that's like even just part of the goal, if your baseline is more positive, if it's not a baseline that exists in survival mode, which again, I think for a lot of people, we can get to a place where that's kind of where we're just acting out of, especially in motherhood, when everything feels so urgent and like we're gonna ruin our kids if we yell or whatever. Like there's
say no too many times or whatever.
Exist in any way outside of like what we see as like how we're supposed to be as a mom. And even if we know that all of that is baloney, it's still there. Like those messages are still there. And so I don't know. I don't know with that thought, like it's almost like there's the working on cultivating more joy and accessing that. But it's also like if you just get to that place where you are experiencing more joy and able to experience more joy, I just can see how clearly in my life it's not that I'm not having the outbursts. It's not that I'm not experiencing intense emotional dysregulation, because at times I most definitely do, and it can be with things that are reasonable to experience emotional regulation or dysregulation, and sometimes it's like just because there's a lot going on. And
Yeah.
so I get completely dysregulated, which I guess is also reasonable. But,
Yeah.
over small things, it looks like. So,
Yes. Yeah.
but it's like my
regulation.
totally.
Yeah.
My resiliency, though, it's like
Yeah.
coming back to that, my ability to get back to a neutral place or back to a place of joy, like the tolerance for the dysregulation is so much higher.
Yeah.
I think that's when you said the thing in the comment about this, about seeking joy. I was like, whoa, this kind of makes sense for where I'm at right now. Like, I get it. I get what you're talking about.
Yeah, because in the comments, I was so interested in your perspective because you said like that shift towards cultivating joy has really made a difference in my life. And I was like, oh, tell me more. Like what has that shift been like for you? And I love what you're saying about it's not that we don't get dysregulated, but it's like our baseline. We kind of raise our baseline to a place of like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And actually things are okay in life, or I like myself, or whatever, whatever it is that's kind of keeping the baseline down, we shift that.
Totally. Yeah. And I feel like it can probably be different things for different people, whether it's working on the self-worth piece and knowing that your worth isn't attached to not yelling at your kids ever, or if it's other life factors that, you leave a job that's causing you to be completely burned out and then you now have capacity for so much more. It's like whatever the way of getting that baseline up is.
Yes, 100%.
It makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, that's going to look different for everybody, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering actually if we could get into that a little bit, and it's totally going to look different for everybody, how bringing that joy in can be. But I think then it's important to talk about that because especially, referring to the fact that joy can be so hard for so many of us to access and we feel like we're in survival mode. We don't know how to get to that joy. What advice do you have then for moms to like figure out, okay, where do I even start?
Yeah. Okay. I love that question. So again, it's going to look different for everybody. But if we think about survival mode as kind of chronic dysregulation, right? For me, there's like maybe 5 categories of factors that contribute to dysregulation. And so survival mode being kind of the chronic state of that. And so the first is like overstimulation and overload. Like there's just too many things. And some of those things we can change and some of them we can't. But taking a real look at like what are all the things that we are holding and which of them maybe do we need to put down. The second category is unmet needs and unset boundaries. So if you don't know anything about what your needs are or what your boundaries are and you can't advocate for your needs and you can't set boundaries, dysregulation will often be the thing that comes in to try to help you to do that. So that's the second thing, that you probably need to learn how to set some boundaries, whatever that looks like for you, right? People are going to have different relationships to where their boundaries are. And in order to understand what your needs are and what your boundaries are, you probably need to understand your emotions. If we don't know how we feel about something, it's hard to know who we are, what our needs are, what our boundaries are. So that's the second category, is boundaries and needs. The third category is like our old kind of programming. So this is where like the people pleasing and the perfectionism and the overachieving, often I find that those are like the 3 biggest like behavioral patterns that make us more vulnerable to burnout, to survival mode. And so that requires like a pretty deep dive into shifting some of those. And then the next category is vulnerability factors. That's like your hormones, exercise, sleep, the eating, how much substances you use, those kinds of things. And then the last one is environmental factors. And I think this one is important because we love individualizing regulation. That's the other thing. But like regulation is a privilege that comes more easily to you if you have a good support system, if you are financially stable, if you don't have to go out in the world and face discrimination every day. So there are environmental factors like, where's my next meal coming from? Can I pay the rent? I went to work and faced like microaggressions all day. Those environmental factors that can fuel dysregulation or keep us stuck in survival mode. And some of that work, we can't change a lot of the environmental factors, but sometimes that's a matter of accepting that it's not a me problem, because sometimes we take that, right? And we're like, oh, that's up to me to change. And so accepting that for me, I'm like, I accept that we don't have a lot of help. And that is going to mean that I'm more stressed and I don't show up as much as the mom I would like to be. And there's not, I can only do what I can do. But I live in a hyper-capitalist world where the economy is wild. Like, that's just what's up. So part of that is just like the acceptance piece of what I can change and what I can't. So where I would start with folks is like to be looking at like those different categories and to get real with yourself about what's keeping you in survival mode. And of course, it's like complex and we may not know, but it's just, like start with one of them and see how that goes and allow yourself for it to be a journey. Like for me, I can only work on one thing. So I'm either working on my people pleasing or I'm getting exercise. It's like, it's okay to just start with one thing and know that you have a lot more work to do, but here's where you're at. So the foundational, I think, is like the self-acceptance. Like, this is where I am and this is what's up and that's okay. And then choose one thing and start with that.
Yeah. As you were listing those categories, I started writing them down because it just clicked. I'm like, these things are not about our worth. They're really not even that much about us.
Yeah.
Like, they are maybe, overstimulation. It's like, what is our tolerance for outside input? Like, we all have different levels of what we can tolerate.
Yeah.
But also, like, when we're talking about overstimulation, it's a lot of those environmental things. It's a lot of the stuff going on outside of us. And that is what's dysregulating us.
Yes.
And when we're talking about unmet needs, when we're talking about not getting our needs met, not having the boundaries to be able to get our needs met, it's like, yes, there's things to work on there. And there's like, we can take accountability and we can show up, but it's not like oh, my needs aren't getting met, so I'm a bad person, right? Like, it's weird to make that judgment there. So
yes,
that's not really about us in a value sense, in a worth sense. And then thinking about old programming, we talk so much about that here. Actually, the day we're recording this, an episode just came out on like thinking about perfectionism and hyper independence and things like that as like coping from trauma, coping from, survival mode.
Yeah.
And that episode with Tashila Justice, really great conversation about that. So it's like that kind of stuff. It's like, yes, we sometimes make that about us and like feel like it's our personality and all of these things, but really it's like messages we've gotten and established in there and like
and
built into who we are.
Totally. And was adaptive at one point in our lives.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's like an external thing that becomes internal.
Yes.
But again, it's like we can't really say that's much about our worth because that's just existing in the world as a human and coping.
Yes.
Developing strategies for that.
Yes.
Thinking about those vulnerability factors, health, things like that. Again, we can take accountability. We can show up in a way that's supportive of that and make sure we're getting enough sleep. But it's like, you're not a bad person because you didn't get enough sleep, right? Like it's
totally. And I don't say these things to be like, now you have 1,000 things
totally
you have to do. Yeah, but rather
I just like thinking about it all. It's like there's the sense of like we can do things about these things, and like you said, like starting small, not trying to like fix everything because that's not what it's about. But it's like, okay, there's all of these different pieces. We have a hand in changing, and when we're talking about like reprogramming things, like that's a lot. Like that's a lot of work.
Yeah. That's a lifetime journey.
It's a lifetime journey for sure. And it requires a lot of support, but it's just knowing that like it's not a intrinsic thing about you. So it's something that like you can choose to do that work. And I love you saying that. What clicked with me just being like, these things, as we said, don't have anything to do with your worth as a human.
Yeah.
But seeing it like that, it's just like, okay, the accepting that sometimes it's just the way it is. And like, if you don't have the help and things are really hard, and maybe there's steps you can take to like change that. But like, if that's not the reality of the situation right now, it's actually just kind of figuring out how to not feel so much shame about it being so hard.
100%.
That like, makes such a huge difference.
And self-compassion is such a strong antidote to both shame and dysregulation. The dysregulation about the dysregulation is often worse than the initial dysregulation. And self-compassion and self-acceptance is, first of all, great modeling for our kids. And second of all, a great tool, an antidote to shame and being stuck in that dysregulation.
Yeah. So kind of looking ahead, because even in that conversation, there is such a piece of, as we've talked about, like the messages we get about like how we're supposed to be regulated all the time. That's what it really appears as. And I'm wondering if there's anything else just in the broader parenting conversation realm that you hope maybe starts to shift, because I think it's so interesting. You're in this world of parent coaching. It's different than, like you said, you're not teaching about gentle parenting or coaching about like a way of parenting, but you're really tapped into that.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about the shifts that I would love to see in the broader parenting conversation. It was quite shocking, actually, when I entered the parent coaching kind of general world, how rigid the lessons are about how we have to be and how much fear-based messaging there is out there. Like sometimes I'll click on, I'm a therapist, like I have a lot of the theory and I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh God, I'm not doing this right. Or I have to do that. And I'm like, what is happening to me? So I think the fear-based messaging that if you are doing this, you are harming your children. If you are doing that, like that's not the right way to do it. I would love to see that shift because I just think it's preying on our vulnerabilities as parents and like our desire to get it right. And I think I have had so many parents that I work with who are like, I wish I had never read a parenting book. I wish that I had never tried to figure this out because I'm more confused and I'm more dysregulated and I feel worse about myself. So moving away from fear-based parenting, I think embracing nuance and diversity. There's actually like a lot of ways to be a parent in a way that will foster secure attachment, in a way that will feel good. And it's so much about finding what that way is for you and for your kid and for your family and for your situation. So I think like just embracing that. When I see parents who use more consequences or less consequences, or they don't use consequences, or they say no a little bit or a lot, or they not at all, I'm like, cool. Does that work for you? Cool. Like, let's just embrace that people parent differently. And how lovely is that? And then the last one, of course, is like reframing regulation. Like, can we reframe it as a journey and as something that we move in and out of? It's not a moralized like destination of enlightened parenting. It's just a place that we like to be at some of the time.
I love that. And I think with all of that, there's such a piece of like moving away from the dysregulation about the dysregulation.
Yeah. Yes.
Like changing the message away from something that's going to lead to shame when we do get it, quote, wrong, when we're not when we're not where we would like to be emotionally.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
That's so important. As we wrap this conversation, something that I love asking guests at the end is about self-care, meeting our needs, which I think actually really connects well to this because we've talked about, having our needs met and setting boundaries as a way to like, it's something that's really important when it comes to being out of survival mode.
Yeah.
So let's get into how you take care of yourself and if you have any advice just for moms to make sure that they are also making sure their needs are getting met regularly.
Sure. Yeah. I think that self-care is, number one, it's going to look different for everybody, which I know probably everyone on your podcast says, but it's also going to look different for each season that you're in. And so for you to be able to pivot, I think requires, again, us to know, like, what am I feeling? So to get right with our emotions, to be able to identify, to know what our values are, what we stand for, what our needs are, what our boundaries are, because in my opinion, it's hard to overlay self-care unless you have the foundation of knowing what you need. Yeah. Otherwise, we're just then chasing the thing on Instagram that told us self-care is, right? So for me, like sometimes self-care is getting better with my eating habits and exercising regularly. But like for real, in January, self-care for me is accepting that I am in bed with a glass of wine and a bag of chips, like watching Netflix at 8 p.m. And that's like, the self-care for me is actually accepting that and not feeling guilty about it. So it changes. What I do for self-care will change depending on the season.
I love that idea of the self-care actually being the accepting, like of whatever it is that's like best for you in that moment or like whatever you're choosing to do. It's like the accepting that is what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so full circle in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's about accepting that I'm that I'm giving myself excuses and that I actually do need to go to bed at 10 p.m. every day, right?
Totally.
But again, like all of that rests on me learning more about who I am and how I operate and what my old programming is and what my emotions are and what my needs are, right? Like the ability to do that pivoting, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's almost
More.
like the accepting of just being a human. Like I'm not trying to like always be perfectly meeting my needs and being like the most stellar example of caring for myself.
Yeah.
In the exact way that I should, because like that's not realistic and it's just another way you can hold yourself to perfection. So if you can accept that, like sometimes I'm on it with my needs and sometimes like I'm choosing to be watching Netflix and that may or may not be what I need right now because I really should go to bed.
Yeah.
So that I'm ready to wake up with the kids tomorrow. But like, that's not what I'm doing right now. So I'm not going to feel shame about it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Well, this has been just a fantastic conversation. And again, like so happy we got to dive into this after connecting on Instagram. How can listeners find you, connect with you, work with you, all of that?
Yeah. So I'm on social media. So as you said, I'm on Instagram. My handle is at parenting_with_Mackenzie, Mackenzie. And I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, which is called Anchored Parenting. And in that Facebook group, I have a lot of trainings and handouts. So what I talked about, those 4 categories of like dysregulation, I have a whole handout about that I'm happy to share with you. And it's in my Facebook group as well.
Amazing. And we'll have it all linked in the show notes. So it's nice and easy to get to.
Awesome.
You are based in Canada. Do you work with transformational parenting coach clients outside of Canada?
Yes. Yeah. So I am a therapist only in Ontario, but I am a parenting coach worldwide. Yes.
Amazing. Love that. Love the access.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for being here and just digging into this. What a rich conversation. And I know there's a lot that I'm going to be walking away from this conversation with. And I hope to anyone listening that there's little nuggets of relevancy there, which I'm sure there are. I think we got into a lot in this conversation. And I think shame is something that most of us experience at one point or another. And so, just take it.
Well, thank you so much for hosting me. I loved this conversation. And, I so appreciate the podcast that you have and the mission that you have. I think it's so important in this day and age of how we're trying to stumble through.
Yeah.
As parents.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah. You're doing something real important.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for tuning in. You are worthy, Mama.